Coming to you from the studios of AM 950 KTNF, the progressive voice of Minnesota. My name is JP Debragosian. You're listening to The Gailey Show. We have a very special episode here because we are less than 3 weeks out to the election. Ray Leiner is joining me from the National LGBTQ Task Force to talk about their program, Queer the Vote. So, Ray, welcome to The Gailey Show.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So the National LGBTQ Task Force is literally the oldest progressive organization for queer liberation in the United States. And I don't want to say, I was kind of telling you this before the show, I don't want to say I'm hitting the panic button on this election, but I'm definitely in the red alert phase of this. So first of all, tell us a little bit about Queer the Vote, and then what is your take on where we're at right now?
Yeah. So, hi, my name is Ray Leiner. I'm the field director with the National LGBTQ Task Force. And yes, we are the oldest LGBTQ civil rights organization in the country. October 19th, which is just a couple of days away, we hit 51 years of doing this work.
Wow.
And that is a really powerful legacy to stand upon, right? One of the campaigns that I have inherited and continue to push forward is our Queer the Vote campaign. And that campaign is really specifically aimed at engaging LGBTQ folks and our allies to move to the polls. So just to be very clear, I work on the C3 side of the organization, and that side of the organization can promote people to go out to vote, can talk to you about our voting plan if you have one, can help you to think through resources and those kinds of things, but we cannot tell you who to vote for. We do not endorse political candidates. We cannot endorse any party, but we can supply you with resources and strategies to think through how you're going to move to the polls.
So for folks who don't know, the National LGBTQ Task Force technically kind of has two organizations. There's the 501c3 that works as a nonprofit, and they have all of those guidelines put on them by state and the national legislation of how a nonprofit can work. But the task force also has a 501c4, which does the fundraising, tells people who to vote for, and will endorse candidates from time to time, depending on the situation and the race. So let's talk about the 501c3 work, the work that you do around Queer the Vote. First of all, how can folks get connected to that?
Yes, that is an excellent question. So for this year's engagement, what we are going to be launching starting October 17th, so this week, we are going to be doing a soft launch of our campaign. And essentially what we're doing is we are looking for a number of really great volunteers. You do not have to have experience in doing some of this work, this get out the vote work. We provide training. And essentially what we're going to be doing is we're launching virtual phone banks, and we're going to be calling into swing states. So what that means is that the task force has what we call priority states. And two of those states we're going to be focused on is North Carolina and Pennsylvania. And so we are recruiting volunteers from across the country. You do not have to live in the state in order to place a phone call to someone, and just encourage them to go out to vote. And so what we'll be doing is we'll be launching the volunteer recruitment component on the 17th, and then we'll start phone calls into North Carolina and Pennsylvania starting October 25th and going until November 4th. We'll be doing evening phone banks, so from 6 to 9 we'll be doing phone calls, and on the weekends we'll also have 2 shifts over the weekend. We encourage folks to sign up for at least 1 shift, and at least minimum 1 shift, 2 to really get into the swing of things. And, just a little bit of context, because I think, when I first got into this work, I got a little nervous about calling people, right, that I didn't know.
Okay, I was just going to ask you about that, because I talked to so many people who are like, I don't want to get into a fight. This seems so confrontational. And also Gen Z and Alpha, to make a phone call seems like it's got to be the apocalypse. Everything can be texted. So walk me through that, the phone banking, and what people can expect to do that, because it's so crucial. It's so important.
Yeah, I think that there's this component of how technology has impacted our interactions with folks, and really the tried and true methods of talking to communities, of mobilizing communities, of building relationships comes from having conversations with people. It's even better when you knock on a door but we're not doing a door knocking program this year. We're just doing the phone banking. And that's mostly because, again, our partners have really strong ground game. And so, as a national organization, we try to be conscientious of what those relationships look like on the ground. And through our C4 strategy, we have resourced organizations to support and beef up their canvassing teams and practices, right? So, on the C3 side,
Yeah.
what we can do is we can support people to make phone calls. And the reality is that when you make a phone call to someone and you're calling them from a different state, 9 times out of 10, they're going to answer the phone and they're just going to be like, oh, I didn't know this information. Or, yes, I am going out to the polls. Or, I didn't think about taking a neighbor or a friend that I know, right? That may not have a car, but I wasn't thinking about it, right? There are all kinds of ways in which folks engage with these phone calls. And very seldom have I, in the 10 years plus that I've been doing this kind of work, encountered like a particularly overtly negative interaction on the phone.
Hmm.
At worst, maybe sometimes people will hang the phone up on you, or they may ask you, who is this? And why are you asking for this person? Why? Because usually when people call from an unknown number, it might be a creditor or somebody
Yeah.
else, right? That you may not want to interact with, right? And so we are not going to set you up to just be like, here's a list and make phone calls. We do training with everyone. We do a little bit of de-escalation strategy and tactic on the phone. We make sure that people have opportunities to do a little bit of role playing on the phone.
Ooh.
So that way, if you are navigating a difficult call, you can practice doing that before you get on the phones. Again, I am not saying that you may not encounter someone who is not interested in the message, but most people who are not interested in the message will hang up the phone or they'll be like, no, thank you.
Hmm.
And it's very seldom, again, in all the years that I have been doing this work, that someone has been particularly nasty. Most people are actually really grateful to hear that somebody cares enough about them and about their vote and about their impact into democracy. And overwhelmingly, those are the experiences that I've had and other volunteers who have worked with us or even paid canvassers have shared with us in all the years that we've been doing these programs.
So, in terms of like how it works, just generally speaking, so you do the training, and then you must get like a list of phone numbers, and then you just call them from your your landline or your cell phone, right?
Yes. So
Okay.
we use a database called the VAN, the Voter Activation Network, and those tools come from civic engagement tables that exist in the state. And we're partnering with a couple of states in order to get access, like VAN access. And so you will be using this really interesting and advanced piece of technology that will help you to know what to say, how the person responded. Um, and keep track of call times, right? Because like for folks who are not used to phone banking, we're not expecting you to call 100 people in an hour or even 50 people in an hour, right? Like your call list is probably going to be about 20 people, right? So during a shift, you may try to call into between 40 and 50 numbers. And depending on whether or not you talk to people on the phone, that the amount of people you're able to reach may get lower, especially if you have conversations with folks, right?
Hmm.
And some of those conversations can be really short, like, hi, my name is Ray. I am calling with the National LGBTQ Task Force, and I just wanted to check in to make sure that you knew where your polling place was this election day and if you have a voting plan, right? And somebody might be like, actually, I don't know that information because it changed, right? And so you give them that information, and then you track that on the van, and then you get another record. A lot of folks can feel uncomfortable and have voice feeling uncomfortable with using their own phones when making these phone calls. And again, I have been making phone calls from the same phone number, and I've had this phone number for 20 years.
Wow.
Um, and so I've never gotten someone call me back. The only time they have called me back is to be like, I missed your phone call and I really wanted to know more, right? Or they might text me to be like, hey, I missed your phone call. Who is this? But I've never gotten someone call me back and be like, I'm going to tell you a piece of my mind, right? Um, and I'm grateful for that, to be perfectly honest. And um, I'm grateful to say that most of the phone calls that I have made have helped people to either come up with a plan or confirm their information as they went out to the polls. So it's been a really helpful process. It's also been a way to connect with people in different states. Um,
Hmm.
I like to chat with folks, and so I try to just be conscientious of how much time I'm spending on the phone because I am also doing things like trying to hear what issues they're concerned about, right? I'm trying to get a sense of what is motivating them to go to the polls or what's not, right?
Hmm.
Or where they might be on the fence.
Wow. So talking about states, so you're focusing on Pennsylvania and North Carolina. I kind of just jumped into the segue there, but I love everything that you're laying out there. And I hope that for folks kind of helps them understand like what phone banking is and how kind of, I don't want to say it's chill, but I think it's a lot less scary, I think, than folks or anxiety producing than folks think it is. So thank you for kind of taking us through that. And also, things that I wouldn't even thought of, like giving your phone number. It's great to have that experience that you're sharing with folks. You talked about that you're focusing on Pennsylvania and North Carolina. So, political nerd like myself, I'm like, yes, this basically all hinges on Pennsylvania. And I'm like literally every day, like checking the polls from Pennsylvania, even though it's driving me bonkers. Talk to me about North Carolina, though. Like, how did you all decide that North Carolina, as opposed to like Georgia or, Wisconsin or Arizona or Nevada?
Yeah, I mean, the task force is really trying to be conscientious of how many national organizations are inside the landscape of a state. And in some of the states that you just mentioned, especially Georgia and Arizona, right, there are a lot of resources. There's been a lot of focus. There's been a lot of investment coming from nationals and a lot of ground game that's happening in those states. And because of that, we try to be conscientious of what it means to leverage the impact of a national organization as we're doing work in the landscape. And so North Carolina was a state that we saw was was dealing with a number of anti-LGBTQ based pieces of legislation.
Mm-hmm.
We also don't just focus on LGBTQ legislation because LGBTQ people are not single issue people. We live at
Mm-hmm.
the intersections of the impact of race, of gender, of sexual orientation, of immigration status, of ability, of mental divergence, right? Or being neurotypical, right? We're dealing with issues of economic impact, right? Environmental impact. And so we try to be conscientious of what those
I hate
intersections.
to I love that. I hate to cut you off. I've got about 20 seconds here. What's the website of folks, how they can connect with you?
Yes, you can go to the www.thetaskforce.org and check out our Queer the Vote page. And we're going to have a page up there launching October 17th where you can sign up for a phone banking session with us.
Perfect. Folks, continue following The Gailey Show because we're going to talk also about the Creating Change conference that the National LGBTQ Task Force is doing. We're out of time today. Ray, thank you so much for joining me here.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
I got to guest host the Matt McNeil Show earlier this week. And during that show, I interviewed Matt Caffrey, Senior Director of Organizing with Swing Left. It was such an urgent conversation that I feel I need to share it with you too today. So here is my conversation with Matt. You're listening to the Matt McNeil Show on AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota, and in the evenings on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk, and in the nighttime hours in Seattle on 1150 AM KKNW. The voice you're hearing is not Matt McNeil. This is JP Debragosia. Matt is off today. Very happy to be sitting in the chair, holding down the fort, and also very happy for Allison Page to be joining us there to talk about her campaign. And now we have joining us the Senior Director of Organizing at Swing Left, Matt Caffrey. Matt, welcome to the Matt McNeil Show.
Very happy to be a surrogate Matt on the show today. How's it going?
Going well. The theme of this episode, we're taking the opportunity to really highlight Get Out the Vote efforts across the country, because as I said at the top of the show, I'm not hitting the panic button quite yet, but from my perspective, I'm definitely in that danger Will Robinson phase where I'm feeling a little freaked out about where we're at, the state of the race. So I wanted to ask you, as the senior director at Swing Forward, what is your take on the race right now and where we're at?
Thank you so much for the question. And, I think it is undeniable that we are in an extremely close and competitive race. But what I want to make sure everybody at home thinks about is that every time you hear a pollster or a journalist say that a race is within the margin of error, just translate that in your head to that the race is within the margin of effort. And if we do the work we need to do, we can win this election. We know that is the case. We've lived this path before. Swing Left started in 2017. We saw the Herculean effort to win back the House in 2018, to elect Joe Biden and defeat Donald Trump in 2020. We came within a hair's breadth of holding the House in 2022, but held the Senate. And we are not going back. We are seeing volunteer energy across the country that is absolutely bonkers. Millions of letters written, hundreds of thousands of doors knocked through Swing Left. I know millions across the progressive ecosystem, phone calls, texts, postcards, like the whole gamut, right? And those are the numbers I care about much more than any given poll. I'm a little weary of polls. I'm wary of them as well. We've seen over and over again it's a little bit like astrology, and I'm sort of tired of having my emotional well-being governed by guesswork. And so I choose to focus instead on the number of doors knocked and the number of letters written and the number of calls made, because I think that, look, in 2020, Joe Biden won a pretty commanding victory, and yet still 1/3 of voters did not vote. We had historic voter turnout, and yet 1/3 of voters did not vote. And what we know is that conversations with voters, especially face-to-face conversations at their door, can substantially increase their likelihood to vote. So look, nobody really knows what's going to happen in this election. The polls make us crazy. Turn off the polling, turn off the news, and go knock some doors. Even if you have to drive an hour and a half to get to a competitive district, it's worth it, because it will make you feel so much better.
I thank you for saying that, because I feel like I can't even turn on the news anymore, because there's always a daily poll that, and I just feel like, in the span of 90 seconds, I can go from, oh, we got this, to I'm leaving the country. And it's just like, it's becoming emotionally exhausting to do that. So first of all, I just want to thank you for margin of effort. And for those folks who are feeling that, the yo-yos and the franticness of the polling and the news media coverage of it, how can folks specifically get involved with Swing Left?
Well, first of all, right now, folks can go to swingleft.org/action and sign up. You type in your zip code, it will show you multiple options. If you're close to a battleground state or district, it'll show you a canvas. It'll show you an opportunity to make phone calls, maybe to join a letter writing party, to adopt letters on your own that you can just print off at home and write on your own time. You can still make a contribution to candidates that might have a funding gap. So there are a lot of different options, but you'll notice in that tool, the cards are in an order. And that order is on purpose. And door knocking comes first, because we know that that face-to-face conversations with voters cut through like nothing else. And I spent all weekend training canvassers here in Ohio. I live in Columbus, and we have an absolutely must-win Senate race if we're going to hold the United States Senate here. We have to win this race in Ohio. I tell volunteers, get out the vote is a time-tested. It is a documented, it is a validated process. And when we are talking to voters, every word we are saying is intentional. We don't thank them for voting. We thank them for being a voter, because we want to affirm their identity as a voter, which then creates cognitive dissonance if they don't follow through and vote. We are not going to just say, hey, will you make sure to vote by November 5th? We will say, how do you like to vote? How are you going to get there? What time of day are you going to go? Who are you going to bring with you? What kind of voter ID are you going to bring? Because we know the social science teaches us that every step in the process we help them visualize or articulate increases their likelihood to then follow through and vote. So again, this is not just something we do to make ourselves feel better. It does make us feel better, and that's great. But it's researched and it's documented, and there's real social science behind all of this that says this is what works to increase voter turnout. And, folks should really feel confident that if they, go to that website, swingleft.org/action, and pick one of those actions, they know that what they are doing will be meaningful, and it will be for a race that is competitive, where this kind of organizing can make up that difference. If it's going to be a 10-point race, nothing any of us collectively can do will make all that big a difference, because 10-point races you can't really swing with our field efforts. But when you're talking about these races that are going to be decided by 1, 2, maybe 3 percentage points, the conversations we have with voters, the folks that we engage, really can make a critical difference. And just a really quick example of that, a couple of years ago in Virginia, the Virginia House of Delegates was decided by a single race. That race, I believe, was decided by a single vote. And that district, swing left volunteers from GW University had gone to that district the weekend before the election and knocked thousands of doors. So it's just the work that we do can have critically important implications. And look, Virginia, after they won a trifecta in Virginia, they expanded voting rights and they invested in clean energy, and they made it, whatever. They did basically everything we want Democrats to do. So it really, over and over again, we see demonstrations that a handful of votes can have an absolutely massive impact on policy that we care about so much. And it really is within all of our power to sway the number of votes needed to win this election.
Take us through, because we've got to think, like Minnesota nice, Midwest nice, stuff like that. That's the thing. I don't want to argue it away. It's part of the culture. Can you give us what the actual visceral experience is of because we know the research is backs up what and you know that research backs up what you're talking about here, and we want people to go and do it. But there's always, I think, this feeling when I talk to people about door knocking about, well, I don't want to get in and have someone start yelling at me, or I don't know, I'm going to feel like I'm going to get all flustered and I have to know all the data points about something, or, what happens if, they've got a gun or something, you know what I mean? There's all these things that people have of there's this fear, right? Sometimes maybe it's irrational. I'm not quite sure. But give us the actual lived experience of what it's like. You're not going alone. You've got a script. There's probably some training. Walk us through what's actually going to happen to someone when they show up, they've gone to the website, swing left, and they're ready to go for door knocking.
I'm so glad you asked. So yes, first of all, remember that we are trying to talk to people we believe are extremely likely to vote for us if they were to vote. We're not going to talk to your MAGA uncle. That's not the goal. In fact, we want to have as little interaction with MAGA voters as humanly possible, because we know, again, the research shows us that if we do talk to them, they're more likely to vote. And that's exactly the opposite of what we want. So we are going and looking for people who are, pretty much on our team already. We might get some folks who are undecided. We might even, no data is perfect. You might occasionally run into a Republican. But if you do, you just say, hey, thanks so much for your time. Have a good day. And you move on. And when you do find somebody undecided, you can have a brief, open-ended, non-judgmental conversation. You're not preaching to them. You don't have to be a policy expert. You just want to make a little bit of a connection with them, find some shared value, and then link it back to your candidate. And you can do that in just a couple of minutes, and it's nothing to be afraid of, because your own personal motivations for supporting the candidate can be really, really compelling to the person you're talking to. But the vast majority of the time, we're not doing any of that. All we're doing is saying, oh, I'm so glad you're supporting Senator Brown as well. How do you normally like to vote? And we're just having a really easy conversation about their voting preferences and helping them literally envision the process of voting. So just one thing on the Midwest nice, I feel that as an Ohioan, some of the scripts will ask you to confirm that the person at the door is who we're looking for before you introduce yourself. I always train people to flip that. It's like we're Midwesterners. We introduce ourselves first and ask who they are second. I get that. But again, just remember, we're not soliciting. We're not asking people for a favor. We're not challenging people or anything. We are inviting people to be a part of our democracy. And fundamentally, we are thanking them, again, for being a voter. We're trying to affirm that identity in them.
I love that, folks. So you're talking to folks who are most likely going to be voting for Democrats. They're on our side. You get to go with a friend or a buddy, a door knocking buddy. Like, you get the script. We need to be knocking on as many doors as possible. And you brought up 2022 and how it was feeling bleak. I'm curious, given the scope and the breadth of your wisdom and expertise in this organizing, how is this cycle stacking up towards the other ones? Because every single cycle kind of feels like this one's the end of the world, and then somehow it seems to get worse, and this next one, this is the end of the world, and it starts to become a little bit exhausting. So I'm curious, because you have data, you know how many, like, the quality of the conversations you're having, the quantity of the conversations. How is this election cycle kind of stacking up to those previous cycles of like 2022 and 2020?
Yeah, well, we're not all locked in our house, terrified of a global pandemic. So and the existential dread we all had in 2020 was pretty bad. I honestly, as stressed as we are now, and of course, I would say I'm not stressed because of the odds. I'm stressed because of the stakes, right? I am stressed because of what would happen if the former president were to be reelected. And frankly, because of the incredible progress we could make if we can elect Democrats at the federal level and in key states, right? So that's what stresses me, but it's not the odds. I mean, I feel like I would, to quote some other folks like Tom Bonnier or whatever, I would much rather be us than them. So there are some things in which this actually feels less terrifying to me. Some of it is, like I said, just sort of circumstantial. But, the election this makes me feel most similar to is 2008 when I was a student. And the energy was incredible. And the grassroots was so fired up. I'm joining a call this week that's called Gamers for Harris. I've joined.
I'm hearing the music. I apologize for that. We're coming up on our break this segment. Matt Caffrey, Senior Director of Organizing at Swing Left. Thank you for joining us on the Matt McNeil Show.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks, everyone, for listening today. Follow us on Instagram at @the_Gailey Show for free ticket giveaways. In the meantime, we'll see you back here next Saturday at 2 p.m. In the meantime, vote and door knock and letter write. Do whatever you can to get out the vote.